We sit here waiting as Israel weighs its possible responses to Iran after hundreds of drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles were fired at Israel from Iran over the weekend. Saturday's attack marks the first time Iran has launched a direct military assault on Israel, as the Islamic nation tends towards using proxies for its attacks. Generally, they use Hezbollah and the Houthis. They use Hamas, anything they can get. The Israeli military reports that 99% of the drones and missiles were intercepted. World leaders from nations, including Britain, France, and the U.S., are reportedly urging Israel to avoid escalating the conflict. But how do you do that? As I mentioned at the top of the hour, it sure seems like the U.S. has lost its position as the bulwark for peace and security thanks to our weakness on the global stage. It's a real problem. Joining me now to discuss all of this, former Congressman, Chairman of the Dallas County Republican Party, and Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. Colonel, nice to see you.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Steve. Thank you.
Now, I was glued to the screen, and then I was on live for several hours as this exchange continued, and Israel knocked down 99%. In fact, most of those missiles and drones never made it to Israeli airspace because they were knocked down over Jordan and Iraq, showing just how isolated Iran truly is in its own region. How do we sit here and encourage them not to strike back, they being the Israelis, at something like this? Wouldn't it be appropriate to at least hit a military facility or two or three to say, look, we're not going to sit here and tolerate that? Your thoughts?
No, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that Israel has to look at, and the world, the freedom-loving world should look at, is decreasing the military capability capacity of Iran outside of the nation of Iran. And when you look at what Israel did in taking out those 6 senior leaders of the Iranian Republican Guards Corps, these were individuals that were responsible for the planning and coordination with Hamas for October the 7th. No different from what we did in taking out General Qasem Soleimani, who had been responsible for a lot of the electric force penetrators, EFPs, that were very deadly to our soldiers and sailors and airmen Marines in Iraq. So yes, I think that we need to have the diplomatic pressure. We need to have the economic pressure. You know, when Joe Biden came into office, basically Iran was bankrupt. They had less than $5 billion of cash reserves. And now he has increased their cash reserves. So that's one of the big things that we should reverse.
Well, let's connect some of the dots here, too, all right, because you hear John Kirby, if you heard the first part of the program, laughing. He laughs out loud when asked about the assets that were unfrozen by Joe Biden company. Some believe as high as $60 billion unfrozen that can be used. And he said, well, that can't happen. It can only use your humanitarian needs. But more importantly than that, China buying 2 million barrels a day from Iran because the sanctions have been lifted. Well, it is China, then, that is funding Iran, that is attacking Israel, that is funding Hezbollah, that is funding the Houthis. China is part and parcel of this problem, are they not?
No, you're absolutely right, because China is the #1 consumer of Iranian energy products, oil and gas. And again, when you look at the fact that, you know, Mr. Kirby can say that these funds are not fungible, that they can tell them what to do with it. I think Joe Biden has said to Russia, he said to Hamas, he said to Iran, don't. Well, that has not proven out to be anything other than just an empty threat to them. So yes, they have all of a sudden, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, everybody that Iran supports, they're flush with cash because Iran is flush with cash. But yet you continue to see Joe Biden put the thumb on our oil and gas industry. So I think that that's something else that needs to be done. And remember that we've been dealing with Iran for, you know, a little over 40 years, because you go back to October the 23rd of 1983 was the Beirut barracks bombing, which Iran worked with Hezbollah, one of their proxy armies that continues to exist today, in killing those 234 Marines, soldiers, and sailors there in that Beirut barracks bombing. So we have long since had a problem with Iran.
Right, and so let me ask you this. Iran is getting financed by China. China's also financing good portions of the open border, spreading propaganda on TikTok and a variety of other places, spying on American citizens, collecting all of our data. At what point do we consider one of these things? Is it the 125,000 people that will die from fentanyl this year? Is it the ongoing attacks from Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, and others that got Americans killed? At what point do we say, China, that is an act of war against the United States, against the NATO allies, against the Western world? At what point do you say, stop, that is an act of war?
Well, the fentanyl is a chemical agent. It's a chemical warfare, and it's an attack being used against Americans to kill hundreds of thousands of Americans. But this administration, for whatever reason, they are owned by the Chinese. They're not going to stand up and do anything against Xi Jinping. We're allowing China to come in and buy up massive tracts of land, to include land that we have right here in the state of Texas next to one of our preeminent fighter pilot training facilities. That's Laughlin Air Base down in Del Rio. Or you look at the fact that we allow a Chinese spy balloon to transit across the United States of America over some of our most sensitive military facilities. And what does the Biden administration do? Nothing. They sold oil from our Strategic Petroleum Reserve to China. So this Biden administration is doing everything that is treasonous and undermining to not just the national sovereignty of the United States of America, but to the safety and security of this country and our allies.
And one more important thing before I let you go today, Colonel, and that is this. The soft stance on Iran. So we've got the China connection figured out. But this soft stance on Iran, pallets of cash on the tarmac delivered by Barack Obama, $60 billion, give or take, unfrozen by Joe Biden. 2 million barrels a day of oil being allowed to leave and to flow into China, which it keeps their coffers full. Why this cozy relationship with Iran? I just don't understand it. Plus, how many of those folks ended up in our country as part of this millions of people that have come in over the southern border? What are we doing here? Why the cozy relationship with Iran? Because that's the way it begins to appear.
Well, for whatever reason, it seems that the progressive socialists, leftists, the Marxists that really are in control of the Democrat Party are in alignment with China, with Iran, with Islamic terrorists and jihadists. And I would also tell you, you need to add Qatar to that list as well, because where is the leadership of Hamas? They are in Qatar. Where was the leadership of the Taliban that Barack Obama released from Guantanamo Bay? They were in Qatar before Joe Biden enabled them to go back to Afghanistan. And what has the Qataris told us about Al Udeid air base there? That they're not going to allow us to use our own assets at that air base in any way, shape, or form to help and support Israel. So the Qataris are not our friends as well. So this administration, when you look at Jake Sullivan, when you look at Antony Blinken, those are the faces of Delta males, and weakness is enticing to people in the Middle East who only understand strength and might.
Yeah. We need real leaders running this country, and I'm just not seeing it, Colonel. Thank you for being here as always.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Steve.